Okay, I'll start while everyone's getting settled. My name is Joan Chidimura. Trevor asked me why am I trying to be cool. This is not being cool, wearing sunglasses. I had a migraine this morning on the train up, so I'm trying to prevent it from coming again. So this is not New York cool. Why am I chairing the session on the sociology of economics? I don't do this. I do the making of difference in genetics. But I should say that it's a relationship issue. I have a graduate student who's writing a dissertation on the recent economic crisis and should be talking to David here. And also I am this year at the Russell Sage Foundation in New York City with 6 economists, including, speaking of elite experts, including Bob Solow, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist. I cannot say that I know very much about economics based on proximity, but I'm learning. Okay, so our session today is, well, we will begin with the introduction by Pierre-Benoit Joly from Paris-Est and IFRIS, and our discussant is David Stark from Columbia, who does study economics. So we're going to switch the time around a bit. Pierre-Benoit will speak for about 10 minutes, and David would like to have a lot of time, so we're giving him between 15 to 20. Okay. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, so thanks a lot. Many thanks to those who made this event possible, and especially to Sheila for this event, but also and foremost for the ongoing efforts to structure and to bring, well, a lot of things in the field. Let me just point out an important difference between this session and the 2 previous ones. As you may know, I'm not one of the authors of the book, so well, I will not be very much well placed to discuss the content of the book. Well, it happens that I was first trained as an economist, so I may have some hints on this issue. But anyway, I'm very pleased to introduce this session. If a symposium like this one had been organized 20 years ago, a session dedicated to markets, finance, and to economic knowledge would have hardly been scheduled. Today, it would be impossible to properly deal with the current and future development of STS without integrating such issues. This is indicative of the place taken by these questions in STS. Well, probably Michel Calon can be credited for having opened this subfield with his edited volume, The Laws of the Market, published in 1998. The area of research which he opened at the time is mainly about the performativity of economics. How do economics, say economic knowledge, contribute to the transformation of economy, and namely markets? And this issue is the core focus of the volume we will be discussing in the session. David Stark will provide deeper insight with a lot more time on the volume edited by Don Mackenzie, and I guess on, well, economic sociology as such. In this introductory comment, I just wish to set the scene and to tackle a few general issues. First, what is the specific touch of STS on economics and on economy? STS scholars develop the study of economics and economy in a way which obviously reflects approaches coined for the study of science and technology. The 2 key words are materiality and performativity. Well, on materiality, STS scholars claim that social existence involves not only actors and social relations, but also objects. Concepts such as actor network, heterogeneous assemblage, or socio-technical agencement capture this idea. Materiality has to be understood in a wide sense, which includes discursive devices, organizations, rules, procedures, laws, and technological objects per se. Performativity, as well, Bruno Latour nicely showed in Pasteurization of France, science is not only about knowing the world, it is also about transforming it, which may involve processes of laboratorization of the world. It is the same for economics as a body of knowledge. Economics is not just about knowing, it is also about producing the world. It is not only about economics being right or wrong, but also, and perhaps more importantly, about it being able or unable to transform the world. The variety of contributions in the field best illustrates the new perspectives related to the systematic use of both concepts. For instance, the study of the strawberry market at Fontaine-en-Sologne, a paper initially published in 1986 and published as well, the English version as a chapter in the volume, is now among the canonic examples, and it is it perfectly shows the need of economic theory, in this case auction theory, and material devices for a market to exist. Note that the author, Marie-France Garcia, is much more influenced by Pierre Bourdieu than by STS scholars. It's a kind of interesting cunning of history, since her paper is now considered as a key contribution for the study of markets by Calon and his colleagues. Finance is obviously a major field of study, and of course performativity is key because of the close articulation between the laboratory and the financial products and their market. For instance, option theory, which allows to create totally new products, such derivatives, and to create their market. Also of interest is the process of marketization of goods which do not belong to the market sphere. Think of the ways property rights, methodologies, technical devices are developed to trade knowledge, CO2, parts of human body, biodiversity, and so on and so forth. Traveling in these areas, the STS scholars have made new encounters, important encounters. First mention, old friends, namely post-Foucauldians, who are very influential on STS and especially on the European branch of STS. The concept of dispositif, device, the central Foucauldian concept is close to the notion of socio-technical agencement, however with some differences related to the way human agents are included in these networks. Views are quite convergent on the definition of economics as a technology of government. Think of the number of illuminating studies on the role of quantitative and rational techniques of economic analysis used in audit, or on the pervasive role of cost-benefit analysis as a tool of government. And in both fields, calculativeness, a key attribute of Homo economicus, is not related to anthropological properties. It is the product of specific socio-technical agencement which produce this capacity. The second encounter is obviously with economic sociology, the field which, by the way, emerged quite recently, say in the late 70s. STS can easily match with key concepts of economic sociology, such as, for instance, embeddedness. And in the STS perspective, markets are not only embedded in social structures, but also in material devices. And on this stance, just let me refer to the edited volume by Trevor Pitch and Richard Swedberg, Living in the Material World, which brings together economic sociology and STS on this issue. But despite this convergence, I would say that the cross-fertilization between both fields remains quite limited, probably because of boundary work. It is important for both fields to maintain its own jurisdiction, and this boundary work translates in theoretical and methodological differences. Let me add a side comment on the growing importance of behavioral economics. Economists increasingly acknowledge the importance of emotions and cognitive biases and admit that the hypothesis of substantive rationality, the key hypothesis of Homo economicus, cannot be supported anymore. And these may have two opposite implications. First implication is to reconstruct economic theory in a way which takes seriously into account the properties of Homo sapiens, so cognitive basis and emotions. This is, for instance, the position of Richard Thaler in a paper published in 2000, quote, "I am predicting that Homo economicus will evolve in Homo sapiens." This prediction shouldn't be an outlandish one. It seems logical that basing descriptive economic models on more realistic conceptions of economic agents is bound to increase the explanatory power of the models, end of quote. And in a way, this leads to economy to perform, to transform economic knowledge. And the second direction is the reverse one. It's design and it's the idea to design and implement dispositives to nudge or correct the defaults of Homo sapiens and help him take good decisions. The volume entitled Nudge, authored by Thaler and Sunstein, is a plea for nudging state intervention. And interestingly, this direction is a good illustration of how economists construct economy through a reform of state intervention. And it is very influential in various countries. Here and there, states are creating so-called nudge units. Well, to conclude this brief introduction and leave the floor to David, I just want to make two final comments. First, let me point out some elements of the STS repertoire which are barely used in this subfield, namely controversies, construction of credibility of scientific expertise, cognitive authority, boundary work, civic epistemologies, co-production, and so on. And for sure, integrating these could shed a very different light on the subject matter, on some important issues, for instance, on finance, who governs finance, who is responsible. This also leads to highlight an important issue, namely taking seriously questions of scales of action from the very local to the global and their interaction. My second remark relates to the weak critical content and the lack of historicity of this subfield of studies. This has been an object of hot debate. I cannot give a fair account of this debate, but just mention some important points raised, for instance, by Daniel Miller and Philip Mirowski, among others. And this leads to point out two concerns. One is that the attention to local adjustment leads to forget longue durée, which too has an agency that needs to be understood in terms of its own temporality. And second, that the focus on performativity may conduct to depoliticize economics. Questions are not new, neither for STS nor for social sciences as a whole. Scholars in this field have mainly focused on the mechanisms and devices which allow an institution like market to perform its function, and it is still an important task. But historical analysis of the colonization of social life by economics or of the colonization of economics by finance are rather sparse, to my knowledge. This leads to outline the need to integrate these fine-tuned specific cases in long-period analysis. So I end up with this, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sheila, for the invitation to the conference this week. Sheila gave me a tall order. She wanted me to talk about the relationship between economics, science technology studies, and sociology, using this edited volume as the launching point. I said I would agree and asked, well, could I also be critical? And she said, well, yes, of course, that's why we invited you. So I have a tall order. I want to start with economic sociology. And the origins of modern economic sociology. Of course, economic sociology goes back to Marx, Weber, Durkheim, Parsons, all who looked at the economy. But in its modern guise, it goes back to a pact that Talcott Parsons made here at Harvard University. Everybody knows, or maybe everybody should know, Talcott Parsons was not a shy guy. He planned to colonize the social sciences and built William James Hall, which was sociology, political science, anthropology, and or psychology. Okay. There was one field that he knew was hegemonic at the time, and with which he made the pact. And we know that he went down the hall and up the stairs in his office in the old Tower Center, I understand in the new Tower Center, and he went to his colleagues in economics and he said, "I make no claim on your territory." In my gloss, Parsons' pact was, you, the economists, get value. We, the sociologists, will study values. You get the economy and we'll study the social relations in which economies are embedded. But I didn't sign that pact. It's not binding on me. It was very valuable. It made an object of study for sociology that was separate from, that said that society was our object of study. And it was very valuable, but I didn't sign it. And I believe that in many respects, economic sociology, in the absence of the intervention and insights from science and technology studies, would have stayed within the confines of that pact. So how do I see that? There are two dominant schools in economic sociology, and the first is that economies are embedded in social relations, and as follows from the value-values distinction, that economies are embedded in cultural values or cognitive frames. But in both those approaches, calculation or cognition is always something that's left unexamined. We leave that to the economists, but actually the economists don't really examine calculation either, so it's really left to nobody to do. But the sociologists were content because they were making great strides, making very interesting discoveries, both through network analysis and institutionalism, these two perspectives. But they left the field of calculation to someone else to do. Enter science and technology studies, Michel Calon, Donald Mackenzie, Karen Norsetina, and their students. And note, by the way, that these are all Europeans. And the ones that I'll focus on here are all ones that moved into the field, not just economic sociology in general, but in particular to define a field, the social studies of finance. So all three had strong skills analyzing laboratories, analyzing highly technical complexes, and they move into the most technically sort of sophisticated field of economics and economic sociology, the study of finance. And when they do that, they begin to change the field. So, whereas network analysis in economic sociology views economies as embedded in social relations, oh, I see. In our view, that's interesting because here I'm identifying as an STS person, which I should probably clarify right at the beginning. In sociology, I might be denounced as one of those like science studies types. In science studies, everybody knows that I'm not a science studies guy. I don't really mind that insider outsider status. It doesn't bother me. It's one actually that I welcome. So, but I am saying here in our view. So here it's interesting. I didn't catch myself. So here I am an STS person. Because instead of saying that calculation is embedded in social relations, so here's why I think I'm maybe even disagreeing with part of science technology studies. I want to say that calculation is not embedded in social relations. That calculation is itself social. That calculation is socially, technically distributed. So I'm interested in forms of distributed cognition. I'm going to understand, as I have been influenced and participated in this field of the development of the social studies of science knowledge, moving into this area, that that is always socio-technical. So if we ask what counts, then what we are trying to do is also bring into the field the tools that must be brought into the accounts about counting, about calculation. I'm not saying that the tools count, and I'm not saying that it is only human beings that count, but that it is those ensembles of persons and their non-humans, relations between persons that are mediated by technological artifacts. That should be our object of study when we're looking at calculation itself. So this book, Do Economists Make Markets, has as its predecessor, it actually has two. It has Michel Collin's Laws of Markets, which is from 1998. But it also, quite importantly, has Donald Mackenzie's An Engine, Not a Camera, how financial models make or shape markets. And I want to talk about these ideas of performativity that are so important in both of these works. So we have here first a statement, it's a declarative one, and Irina, who is, I guess, in Moscow and has posted it on this website, she says, this is a pipe organ in largest hall of Moscow House of Music. We have another statement, a performative one, I apologize. And many people in this field of performativity go back immediately right straight to Austin, and then in some ways, oh, sorry, I have my screen. See, I have to walk and chew gum at the same time. I have to hit it here, and I have to hit it here so I can see it. We have a performative, I'm sorry. So we had the declarative, now we have the performative, I apologize, the speech act, which brings about the very object that it is saying. So many people, in using this notion of performativity, go back to this idea and, I think wrongheadedly and quite misguidedly, end up doing something that's an awful lot like saying something makes it so. Or the model performs the economy. The paper by the Black-Scholes paper performed on option pricing, performed. I don't think that is what Donald is arguing in his book, An Engine, Not a Camera. And I think it's a more interesting aspect of performativity that really brings into our focus how it is that models are used. So performativity after Mackenzie, in An Engine, Not a Camera, first statement, a financial model is not a representation, it is an intervention. So for Mackenzie, financial models are interventions that format, they shape, and perform markets, and their use brings new economic objects, for example, certain kinds of markets, into being. So I want to use a little plate example here of how I see that process. We have some, I hope you can see this, the sun's really coming in over here. We have some wild terrain. Someone makes a model, they put this other feature in it, and then quite importantly, whoops, they make a predictive statement. This is the way that people get from point A to point B. And the more people who use this model of the terrain with the path and use that to get from point A to point B, the more a possible object, the path, running from point A to point B comes into existence. So in my definition, performativity is a model is performative when its use increases its predictive capabilities. So we have to have a model, we have to analyze then how is it used, and how is it that its use improves the predictive performance of that prediction. So a model is, we don't just have anything that can be models, we have particular kinds of restrictions on what is a model, its use, and what performativity is. There's a problem, or there are many problems probably, with this view, and one of them that I see, and I see it actually as being one that's not limited to the papers in the volume Do Economists Make Markets, but more broadly among many of the STS people who are working in the field of finance, is that they leave out the aspect of skilled human performance. So they move right from models to performance, and they leave out that the human actors in them could be reflexive about the practices that they are engaged in. And I don't mean by that, oh, now we have to bring the human beings back in, these heroes who have this reflexive capacity. No, I want to keep using those same insights, and I want to say that there is a materiality of reflexivity, that it is socio-technical, that reflexivity is something that is not some individual act of cognition, but it is social, it is organizational, and it is socio-technical. So to make that argument, that at least I need to make some broad, however schematic and however truncated, showing you that I could sort of make good on some of those claims. So now I'll have to juxtapose two books, the one by the STS people and the other by this weird hybrid STS economic sociology guy, The Sense of Dissonance, my new book from Princeton. And I want to go back. Now, remember I told you about the network analytic view says that calculation is embedded, or markets are embedded in social relations. The institutional view holds, and it really focuses on the scripts and routines, and this quoted phrase here, unreflective action, is from Walter Powell and Paul DiMaggio's 1991 volume, which was a key piece of institutionalism in the new economic sociology. So that's how they view action, as unreflective action. Now, in my view, as I said, I think much of the STS literature does the same. It looks too much at unreflective action. It doesn't have a kind of concept of reflexivity in it. And that's bothersome to me for several reasons, not least of which is, why do we deny to the actors we study those practices which we value so much in our own work? So I want to bring those practices to the highlight, and I'll tell you just in the last 5 minutes here work that I've been doing with Daniel Bayunza. It's one of the chapters of my book, and we're also moving ahead with that and have several new papers. So Daniel and I go into a trading room and we ask, how do traders deal with the fact that their models are fallible? So this is one of the first things you hear when you go into a trading room, and if you only read the STS stuff, you would think that these traders have a very peculiar idea about their models. They never kind of reflect about them. They aren't critical of them, and there's no variation at all in how they use them. But if you talk to traders, they will tell you things like, and this is how they socialize their young traders in these trading rooms. This is one on Wall Street we study. And they'll tell you every model is flawed. Every financial model is flawed. Some make more money than others. So there are socialization that goes about. But more importantly, there are a set of material practices in the room. So I want to come back to the declarative statement, this is a pipe organ. And I want to make another one, Cecinas paru peep. Now, what is this one? It's a declarative of sorts. It's not exactly a performative, but it's somehow got some dissonance and doubt about the statement that itself is happening. And we find as well in San Diego, is it Scripps, Howard, Joan, or Scripps, the big microbiology, the biology lab. Okay, this Cecinas paru molecule, and this is a poster. It's a large one, and it's in the lab. Always this dissonance, always this reminder. What we're doing these are not molecules. There's something else going on. And the traders that we studied, the arbitrage traders that we looked at all kinds of arbitrage arbitrageurs today. I want to talk about merger arbitrage, and I've got 3 minutes left and I can do it. The room is populated with devices for doubt. There are not only devices that perform markets, there are devices that the traders use to bring about the capacity to be doubtful about your model even while you continue to believe in it, if you can get that as a practice, but that is kind of what's going on. As I said, this reflexivity is not exterior or above the structures. It's not a reflexivity which is some kind of trader's version of intellectual gymnastics as they kind of turn on themselves. It's grounded in a set of material practices. Those practices start from the problems of the cognitive challenge of the trading room. So what we're going to see is that calculation in merger arbitrage involves the dissonance between two sets of probability estimates. So the traders at the desk make a probability estimate that a given merger, which is announced, will actually take place. And then they use a second estimate, which they derive from their rivals, as an opportunity to disrupt, to challenge, to introduce some aspects of doubt in their practice. And the trading room is punctuated on an irregular but frequent basis in this, and so describe that. So we have a trader. He's going to make, there are 159 of 160 men, so I may use the male terminology here. A given trading desk is going to make probability estimates based on its proprietary models. Now, it will come up with a model, it will come up with a lot of databases, and those will be on the screen. The problem is that the trader's instrumentation, whoops, I'm going to just dispense with this. These are very powerful scopes for viewing markets. But the problem is that these scopes that reveal can also conceal. So at the same time, and every trader says, you can never see all of the market. You can only see part of it. So you will, the more powerful they are, the more they allow you to see, the more they're like goggles that will limit you from seeing other things. So, as in just about everything, an artifact that helps us see also is going to conceal something. So, in this world, if you take your model for granted, if you assume that your model is performing the market, if you assume that your model is the molecule that then you can lose your shirt. So what do? To avoid this kind of cognitive lock-in, that is to be be trapped by your own success, traders turn to socio-technical networks outside the trading room. So we want to think about the relation between the trader and his rivals. The standard economic sociology, kind of network analytic way of doing this, would be to think about the personal ties between traders among each other. And this is not the right way to go. These ties do happen, but they are not the important ones that trigger the reflexive modeling. First of all, the trader is sitting quite isolated from other traders. And moreover, what the trader would really like to see is the trader would like to see the screens of their rivals. If I have my model, it's here. I've done my estimates. I've got all my databases in here, and I've actually placed a bet. I've said, here's the probability that I think this is happening. What I would like at that point is I would like to see Sheila's screen. I would like to see the cells in her Excel file. I would like to see the formulas that she's using, and I might like to see Jones, and I might like to see Pierre Benoit and others, and I'd like to see at least 5 or 6, because then I could ask, what am I missing? The discrepancy there would trigger me to think about, what am I missing? How confident can I be if I knew that I was not being trapped just by my model? Then that would be great. The problem is that Sheila's model is highly proprietary, and so is Jones, and so is Pembroke. There's no way I'm going to see what's on your screen, and there's no way you're going to talk with me. Even if we're great buddies and we meet at the bar after work every day, you're not going to tell me what's on your screen about a particular trade at a particular time. And these people are moving at Mach 5 speed through this space. This is not a leisurely stroll. The timing is, okay, you're making money in seconds, not in minutes and hours. So what do they do? Instead of looking at what other individual traders are seeing or talking with other individual traders, they look at something which is called the spread plot, which is a representation of the collective estimates of their rivals. And this merger is announced, and it can happen that, here I'll move, that the spread, which is the difference between the prices of the target and the acquirer, these are mergers, and as the spread gets closer, as the trade gets closer and closer to the eventual merger, which may or might not happen, and that's what you're betting on. Sometimes there's spikes. The spread gets larger, and this can be an indication to the trader that there is something going on out there among the professional arbitrage community that I hadn't seen. And so our ethnography of the trading room shows our merger arbitrage desk every once in a while, and actually we limit it to one morning. The study is 3 years, but the ethnographic description is limited to one morning. Several times, what are we missing? So their traders are watching the spread and then reassessing their own models. Run through that real quickly. I don't need that. We don't need this. The spread plot instantiates the diversity of dispersed anonymous actors. So the trader looks at the spread. If there's no discrepancy, the trader becomes more confident. If there is such dissonance, it prompts research, a question. This dissonance disrupts, and it prompts reflexivity. This is not herding. This is not behavioral economics. This is, I'm especially interested when the market is somewhat different than me. That, in turn, prompts research. So it's not, the idea about herding and information cascades is actually about limiting information, limiting search costs. So what you should do is when you see other people doing something, you just follow them along. This is different. It actually prompts you to do more research, and our ethnography shows exactly how this happens. We call this reflexive modeling. Show how it differs from this. I've made these arguments. Just one last point. We talked about disasters in the previous session. Our work also looks at disasters. It looks at what are called arbitrage disasters. There have been many. They're not entirely frequent. When I say many, more than a dozen, and they can sometimes be very large. The trading room and the merger arbitrage desk that we studied was involved, bet wrong, in the largest merger arbitrage disaster in history, in which the arbitrage community collectively lost $1.8 billion. That's not trivial. Our desk also participated in that and lost. Now, what can happen is that in cases lacking diversity, you don't get dissonance. Your estimate looks more and more like mine. I do not see difference. And what it can lead through this process is in the very act of beginning from caution. That is, I don't want to lose my shirt. I am cautious. I am careful. Over many, many trades is giving me confidence in this system. And now I see in a particular trade, and we show in great detail the one that was the disaster, how traders begin betting, become even more confident. That feeds back into the system, and the resonance that results blocks reflexivity and can lead to collective calamity. What is happening is that a process which assumes from the beginning that there was cognitive independence, that Sheila's model and my model and Jones were different, okay, when we do not, there's sort of lacking in this. It could be interesting to look at this. This could be highly contingent. It could just be if enough of us agree soon enough that we begin to lock in, and that resonance builds up, and it leads through the loop of cognitive interdependence to collective calamity. So I'll stop there.
Thanks. Now you know how to bend. Questions?
I wonder to what extent the traders you describe are really traders, like traders, because they are masking as really STS scholars. My question is, to what extent is reflexivity a really central aspect of STS scholarship, to extrapolate from your work in economics to STS as a whole?
Okay. You know what? I'm not the person to answer that question, I think. Unless you could find it interesting for I'll be the non-STS person looking from the outside. I actually think it's very interesting because I'm a huge fan of Trevor Pinch and Trevor Pinch. That paper, which was quite a long time ago. Trevor, when was that? That was 1980. 84. Okay, just a bit before we met. So what has been interesting from me is that the field, which puts an emphasis on reflexivity as the field which is the part of science which studies science, I see that as a kind of important moment in the field of STS. What's quite interesting is that my colleagues, for whom, of course, I have extraordinary respect, Michelle, Karen, Donald, and others, don't give to the actors they study this same capability of reflexivity. Yeah. So I don't want to answer whether the traders are STS people. That's probably not important. That they are like many of us, like many scientists. You don't need STS to have reflexivity in science. There are science. My guy, this Cecinas Pound molecule is already. He didn't read Austin or anything. Right, but he said, and whether he's right or not, what is the molecule anyway? He doesn't need to go there, but he's already introducing in his lab. We need to be reflexive about the practices that we're engaged in, and the traders do it. They do it, yeah.
I actually would like to say that yes, I think the people in the field are reflexive. I don't think that we write without reflexivity, and so now you're making me want to go back to all of their writings and read again. And see.
Oh no, may I just make myself clear? I was saying yes, as scholars they are reflexive, and that's why I find it so puzzling that we deny to the agents that we study the same practices that we value so highly in our own field.
So what I'm saying is that in fact we do. So I'm writing about geneticists, and I see them debating amongst themselves. So I think that many of us do write about the people we study in that way. So that's what I mean, that I have to go back and reread their work. Thank you. Yes?
Thanks. Hi, Jerome Whittington from Dartmouth College. I really enjoyed your talk very much. But one thing I wanted to mention just before I ask my question is that I've done some work with environmental managers in hydropower development who are constantly criticized by activists. And the good environmental managers do something very similar to what you're describing, which is they don't agree with the activists, but they listen very closely to what they're saying. Because actually the activists have a totally different source of information from what the environmental managers are able to get. So I think there's some interesting resonance there. My question comes from the sense at a certain moment in your description, it sounded a lot like positive feedback loops or negative feedback loops,
Yeah.
and the possibility of a sort of systems theory, and markets being based on information, the sort of circular information and the way that you can have systemic effects. But you're insisting on reflexivity, so I wondered if you could talk about that a bit more. And perhaps it seems to me to have something to do with thinking and cognition per se. I would love to hear your thoughts around critical social science of thinking, actually.
Yeah. You're right. First of all, we're very interested in systemic risk, going back to the prior panel. In finance, systemic risk is largely discussed in terms of liquidity crises, where a failure of one unit will cascade through a system. And we're interested in a different kind of systemic risk. And it's one in which failure is calamitous, like simultaneously for everybody. But occurs not because one has failed and then it ripples, but because of this loop of cognitive interdependence, they become a practice which is born out of a desire to avoid individual cognitive lock-in, right, can lead, when there are not sort of system breaks that disrupt, as they do in the daily moments, right? But the more that happens collectively, that there are no sort of breakers, no circuit breakers that stop the positive feedback loops, then that resonance can lead to a systemic collective failure. I don't mean systemic, it brought down, the United States economy. It's systemic throughout the arbitrage, the professional arbitrage community. I wish I knew a lot more about cognition and a lot more about informatics and information science. So I'm trying to understand these traders as much as I can. And if you have things that you think would be interesting for me to read, I'd be delighted to do so.
Okay. Thank you, Pierre Benoit.
Well, it was just on to say that I think I agree on your main point. There is a blind spot in this type of studies, namely, interpretive flexibility, questions of implementation, the skills of those who work in this domain, and it is surprising because in other fields of study of STS, this is really an important point. So it is kind of surprise to see that, and I guess that it is very much related to the importance and the novelty of performativity. But performativity, in a sense, it is a brilliant idea in this domain, but it is also a faux ami, as you pointed out. So this is my main reaction.
Christopher?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Chris Jones, thanks. I want to follow up on this notion about understanding reflexivity of actors and the level of analysis. So within a lot of STS scholarship, I think you do see studies of scientists recognizing they're constructing facts, or heart surgeons recognizing that bodies are profoundly different and they have to adapt to them, or technologists knowing that you have to have a feel for the machine that's not quantifiable. But what's particularly significant is that if you move one level up, that level of reflexivity and contingency gets lost, and what gets presented is a very simplified reductionist view that then becomes incredibly powerful. So I'm curious, I absolutely buy that your arbitrage traders recognize the messiness, the contingency, the reflexivity all the time, but then the question becomes, if we want to understand how this plays out, how are they representing this world to their managers and to people above them? How are they representing it to the world? Because that's often the level at which the policies get made that shape how these systems are understood. And so it seems to me there's a lot of effort in STS to look at this reflexivity, but sometimes that's divorced from how the world understands things and gets structured. And I'm curious if you have any reflections on that aspect of things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. First, let me make a clarification. I hope that people don't think again that I'm trying to just bring people back in, that my traders are reflexive. Yeah? The object of sociology, many people think, is human beings. Actually, I think that the object of study of sociology is being human. And that what it means to be human is to be an agent in the world with objects. And these are part of our humanity, even as they are apart from us. Okay, so it is not the people that are reflexive, it is this socio-technical system that provides reflexivity. So just to be absolutely clear on that. My traders are not heroes. They aren't. What's interesting for me are the devices that they've come up with to help them deal with these kinds of problems. Now, your level problem, I don't think that's the problem. I don't think that Donald Carr and others, for example, are looking at a different level up where policy is made. And I think that there's a problem that my agents are reflexive down at this one and people are not up there. I think it is, if you look at their work, there's very little discussion of variation, of variance. You don't see in the piece, the AJS piece, which is wonderful, the Mackenzie-Milo piece. The idea is that everybody's using the model. They're all using the same model, and they're all using it in more or less the same way. And the fact is that even when traders all use the same model, it's a very interesting kind of problem to think of anyway. They do so aware of its fallibility, and because they do that, they use models differently and less uncritically than is portrayed in that work.
Clark?
So let me rephrase what Chris was trying to say, because I think there's a question here. So Donald himself, in a much earlier book, which wasn't about markets, it was about nuclear missiles, looked at a problem called the circular error probability, which was what was the error circle around where a nuclear missile was going to hit if you launched it at Moscow from Vandenberg Air Force Base. And what he discovered was exactly the variance that you're talking about. Was a variance across in the distribution of that measurement or that expectation across different groups within the nuclear missile complex. Those who were closest to the sort of the practices of measuring that uncertainty actually had fairly robust reflexivity about in other words, fairly high uncertainties that they gave these missiles to actually being able to get to where you wanted them to go. The anti-nuclear activists had equally uncertain expectations. But there was a group in the middle, and these were the people who managed the nuclear weapons complex. They weren't the technical folks who built nuclear weapons guidance systems. And they weren't the anti-nuclear folks on the outside. They were the folks who managed this overall complex. They had incredibly small expectations about circular errors of probability. In other words, they actually thought they could do a pretty good job of hitting targets. And so I was at last summer the annual meeting of the Society for Advancement of Socioeconomics. It was quite a lovely meeting to go to. It was a place where STS ideas were welcomed. Donald was a keynote speaker. I'd been invited to be on one of the panels. It was a really great environment to work, but there were other people who were looking at other parts of the economic complex, if you will, including what was going on at Standards & Poor's and Moody's and these folks, where it was very clear that the expectations about models and modeling practices were quite distinct from the kinds of discussions that or kinds of practices your traders were operating. And likewise, the people outside the system who were buying and trading securities, not the traders in the trading rooms, but the folks buying bonds through e-trading. Those folks were using these ratings, for example, in a very unsophisticated, straightforward. I know what this is telling me about
Junk.
security,
Yeah.
right? So,
I realized I made a mistake. A very interesting mistake, because I said our view. And so my mistake was to pose myself as someone from outside STS criticizing my STS colleagues, when I should have used we.
Okay.
Right? Not they were screwing up, but we as a field have made a mistake. We as a field, with our history of importance, of stressing the importance of reflexivity, have, in this case of the study of finance, left that out. So let's get back to business. So, I think that then we can't, then it's not like David taking pot shots at STS. And because I said in our view, I hope you'll get that that's sincere and not just, Joan, do you think that's,
Yeah.
I'm not,
Okay.
that idea is not to take pot shots. It's really trying to move this field forward.
Right, right. And I think that there are many people in this room who are
Yeah.
doing research where we do take it seriously.
Right.
Now, I'm in a quandary. We have Daniel, we have Alan, and then Kaushik, but then we have a few other people who haven't spoken, so I feel tempted to ignore you and move on to the people who have not spoken before. Would you be all right with that?
Perfectly.
Okay, so, sorry, Kaushik.
I'm Chris Saha. I'm a postdoc at MIT and also in Sheila's program. I have, I think, an unfair open-ended question, but I'd like your thoughts on it, because this is really, I think, trying to put together the last panel and this panel. So I think I'd like to hear a post-mortem of the financial crisis and how it relates to, I think, this Parsons Pact that you mentioned in your talk. So how do you see that this crisis of 2008 relate to how the disciplines were making these pacts and understanding both models, reflexivity, STS, and economics? So open-ended, unfair question, but what would you have done differently? How would you have reorganized STS to deal with this situation?
That's just way too huge. Because you asked me both to kind of reflect on what I think the causes of the crisis were, and reflect on the causes of a problem in the field. I'll have to be very brief. I mean, I think the lessons that Daniel and I point to in looking at particular arbitrage disasters may have relevance for thinking about the financial crisis. And the problem is with resonance and the lack of diversity. That might be systemic in an institutional sense. It may be that we had a financial system in which too many people were going to too few universities, working with too few economists, and having too few models, and having sort of too little of all kinds of cognitive as well as other kinds of diversity. And so it was possible for there to be a kind of collective cognitive lock-in. I have not studied the financial crisis, but I'm in lots of conversations with Donald, for example, who's been looking at aspect. I mean, I think it's very difficult for people to study the crisis. You can study particular kinds of crises and particular moments of it, like Donald's working on the crisis in mortgage derivatives. And I think I've been persuasive. And the most recent paper that he has that's going to be coming out in American Journal of Sociology uses these ideas of dissonance and resonance. So I think what we did in the small, that other people may look at in a more macro perspective.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm fine, but we can take the microphone out front if you still want to entertain the question up there.
Oh, okay. So Daniel's next.
Oh.
Sorry, Daniel.
I very much liked your main argument and found it very convincing. Though in the end I was wondering whether you were not making like a pretty classical account of market failure by looking at individual actors, their ways of calculating, and then identifying lack of diversity and variation as basically a way of common error. And so, and like the classical argument being, if you have diversity, then markets work. If you don't have it, if you have monopolies, be it by economic power, in this case, cognitive monopoly, it might. So, is it that kind, or I mean, is there more to it? And the other one, I mean, it touches a bit upon your last remark, Dalton Clark's question, but I would be very interested in basically adding to this level of individual calculation the level of institutional rationality, and the question of how reflexive or not is it. And you made a little remark just and before, and I mean the role of rating agencies, the model they used, and the basically cognitive monoculture. I mean, that's again a similar kind of argument, but also in sociological terms, to take into account these different levels and how they interdepend and enforce or contradict. I mean, could you maybe expand on that a little bit? This institutional levels of rationality and reflexivity.
You want to try it?
No.
I mean, I think your question is very interesting. It might be that we also want to have a conversation, because I suspect that there's a different. The interesting thing that we could start in kind of fleshing that out is if we have very different ideas about what markets are, or very different ideas about what cognition is, or if we would agree on those things, then we could talk about, well, what does it mean to think across levels or domains, or you use levels, but I'm not sure that it's leveled up like micro, macro or something. I do think that markets are a form of distributed cognition. And I think it's interesting for us to move from thinking about the individual isolated actor as the unit of cognition. And it's debatable whether that one is the unit of decision making. If you looked at my ethnography, you would think, well, there is a trader who's going to eventually push the buy, sell, the thing. But the desk is doing it. It's a desk. It's a group of people. You have a senior trader and his assistants, and the instrumentation is as much an important part of the scene as this one guy. So I started with the social in a conventional sense, but what's making the decision? He's set up his model in such a way that when this part of the cell moves from blinking orange to red, he's provoked to do some things, and when it moves to blinking green, it does others. So I'm trying to get at that where is the cognition and where is the action, that it really is distributed. It is distributed at the desk. Our prior paper, Tools of the Trade, talks about how the very physical layout of the room is important for cognition. And that's a very interesting case, because we had come to those preliminary ideas that who sat next to whom, literally, was important in the room, and 911 happened and our trading room was destroyed. And then we went out, because they invite us to work with them and study them, as they say, it mattered that somehow you were supposed to be in the World Financial Center studying us when this happened, and now you must be here to witness what we're doing. So we get there, then we see that within the constraints of this kind of basic warehouse, they have reproduced the physical layout of the trading room in every possible respect as they could, except that it wasn't exactly the same. And so two desks that had desks, like merger arbitrage and stat arbitrage, or index arbitrage, that had not previously been in the prior 6 months in contact with each other, come in contact with each other, and a new kind of trade develops. So what is the room? The cognitive agent, is the desk, is the individual. And then on this study, we're going out of the trading room to look at the cognition that's distributed in a certain kind of way across the entire professional arbitrage community.
Okay, great answer. And we can continue this during the reception. I think that Alan gets first dibs and then Kaushik on David Stark. I want us to thank first Sheila and our two speakers for this session. So,